All right, still to come, STO Social Spotlight. Matt Underwood, our Indians play-by-play voice here on STO. He'll be calling the play-by-play of that big high school matchup, the Regional Division I championship between St. Ignatius and Mentor. And, of course, Ryan Cavanaugh with his review and preview of all that tournament action here on your home for the OHSAA Football Tournament, SportsTime, Ohio. Joining us now is Jon Morosi of FoxSports.com. We've had John on the show numerous times. John, good to have you back. How you doing?
Doing very well, Bruce. I'm very much impressed with the Buckeyes, what I've seen of them. We'll see how this the final game of the year goes. I think Ohio State has the upper hand.
Well, yeah, it's a shame we're on probation, although I thought from the get-go we'd be a year away. Give Urban Meyer a year to get some skill position guys on offense and some speed demons at linebacker. And it's a Buckeye-friendly schedule. I don't know if you've looked at it for next year, but they may be just a year away.
Well, I'll say this, Bruce. It's a good thing for Michigan that Michigan won last year. I think that was Michigan's year to win, and they were lucky they did it.
John, I got to pick your brain. This deal is unprecedented because not just involving 12 players and the controversy of Loria and what the Blue Jays are trying to generate like the early 90s, but $175 million worth of contracts.
Well, Bruce, it's a lot of money, and certainly we saw actually even more. I guess still the largest, the king of all salary dumps was still in August there with actually $250,000 going there from Boston to L.A. But you're right. The feel of this one feels like a greater capitulation because with Boston, you know they're going to reinvest that money in the club and try to win. That's the way it works in Boston. That's the way it's always been there. They really just kind of had, this was a one-shot deal where it just did not work, the current mix, and they had to get out from under those deals. This, Bruce, is much more troubling from an overall baseball standpoint because what this tells us is the Marlins in this new ballpark, publicly financed, all those different things, the promises they made last year, the reality is they're operating the same way they operated when they were playing at the football stadium in Broward County. Nothing has changed. They still build them up and they tear them down quicker than any other franchise in baseball. And I think if you're a Marlins fan in South Florida, or if you're Jose Reyes, or if you're Mark Burley, I think you have every right to be upset because this is not what they promised they were going to do last year.
I keep tabs on your writing all the time. I don't think you've written this. I'm going to give you an idea for a thought provoker with your readers.
Okay, go for it.
We have in Cleveland for years, decades, been starving for a championship. And periodically with our three sports teams, we've gotten into the playoffs. But, we knew when we got into the finals with LeBron against San Antonio, we weren't going to beat anybody with any sports knowledge knew we weren't going to beat San Antonio. We thought in 2007 with the Indians, had we defeated Boston, we could have beat Colorado, but we didn't get there. The Browns haven't been in the Super Bowl ever. We go back to 64 with them. So I preach all the time to the viewers of the state of Ohio, I don't want to seek just the playoffs. Screw that. I want a championship. Now, with that being said, what would you rather have? Would you rather have a team not making the playoffs but winning a championship every 5, 6, 10 years like the Marlins have done and then unload and stink for so many years like Huizinga did before Loria, but nobody can take away those world championships? You see the scenario.
Bruce, I think that there's something to be said from a fan base standpoint of at least having won it once or a certain period of time. And I think that certainly I think Indians fans, I'm sure, feel that way. I mean, going back and for generations now wanting that championship. And I think that for some level, I think a lot of Red Sox fans, for example, when they finally won it there in Boston in 2004, there was that relief, and it was finally there for the fan base. And I certainly they have continued to win for the most part since then, and I think that's certainly been sustainable. But I think if you look at the White Sox, I mean they haven't won a playoff series since winning the World Series in 2005. And I think if you were to ask a White Sox fan, would you rather have been a White Sox fan born in 1980 or 1985, see your team win it all, and then not go back to the ALCS after that, or be a Tigers fan where you've gotten to the World Series twice in that same period of time and not won it. I think you probably say you'd rather be a White Sox fan, because I think that you want to have won the big ring and to have that championship that you said is kind of yours to cherish forever. So I do think on some level the boom and bust thing works if you strike it and you really do it. I think that some teams try to kind of maximize windows, and the Tampa Bay Rays have kind of done that on some level. But I think the really good organizations, Bruce, can do it both ways, where it's not so much the peak and the really low valley, but it's a peak and a slightly lower peak, or more of a plateau. And that, I think, is what the Rays have done remarkably against all odds, where they've been able to make the World Series in 2008 and then still be competitive basically every year since then, make the playoffs 2 more times since then. Really, I think one of the great triumphs in sports. That, I think, is probably the best model for a small market team, mid-market team like Cleveland, like Oakland, those types of clubs. You mentioned the Rays. I am suggesting, and I don't know this is one of the big questions I wanted to ask you prior to you coming on today. We hear that the Rays, you can never have enough pitching, we know that, but the Rays, all the sources, including guys like you that are so connected, are saying the Rays might be open-minded because they need offense to trade one of their starting pitchers. I don't believe they would trade Price. For the right deal, first question about this, do you think Shields is available? I do. I do. I think Shields is available. I think Hellickson's available. I think that in the blockbuster, just absolute can't say no to a deal, I'm sure Andrew Friedman would consider moving David Price as well. But, I mean, it would have to be an epic deal. I mean, we may be 2 hours away from finding out that David Price is a Cy Young winner. So, I mean, you're going to have to knock him, just totally blow him away with it. But I think with the Rays, Bruce, we've learned that there's no such thing as an untradeable piece. For those smaller mid-market clubs, I firmly believe there's no such thing as an untouchable player, because even when these guys are at their peak value, height of their powers, you always have to kind of keep an eye on the kind of intermediate time frame. And so I think that these guys, I think David Price has to be available. I think he's going to be traded? No. Do they want to trade him? Of course not. But I think on some level, even the elite of the elite, those guys, they have to be available just because of their economic situation against that competition they have to play against in the American League. All right, let's stay on Shields. I am suggesting to our fans that Antonetti offer the Rays Asdrubal Cabrera and Shin-Soo Choo, and throw in a couple of minor leaguers, not Lindor, who's the Indians' best prospect, but throw in a couple of minor leaguers if necessary. Offer that to the Rays in exchange for Shields. They have Zobrist, but they could move Zobrist to second base, or they could put Asdrubal Cabrera at second base. The Indians have just picked up Aviles. He's a stopgap until Lindor is ready. I don't think the Indians miss a beat defensively. They lose a little offense. And quite frankly, I don't know if Cabrera here in Cleveland is going to achieve the offensive numbers that he did a couple of years ago. Shin-Soo Choo is represented by Boris. He's gone anyway. The point is this. If the Rays trade Shields to another club and get less in return, that one on paper looks like Cabrera, Choo, and a couple of minor league prospects, I'm going to go insane here on television. Well, Bruce, I think on some level the Indians have to figure out what they're trying to do here. And I think, they've got Terry Francona in place. Clearly, the point is they want to win at some point. The question is, when are they going to really go for it? And I think that if you're the Indians, if you're Chris Antonetti, you look at the landscape. Do you look at your rotation and say, if we make one move, if we get Hellickson, if we get Shields, and Hellickson, by the way, I think makes more sense than Shields because he's cheaper and you got more control over him for more years. Are you one pitcher away from beating the Tigers? and beating the White Sox. And I think they're more than that away. I just, objectively speaking, I don't think they're right there ready to beat the Tigers and ready to beat the White Sox. Because I actually think Chicago has a chance to be very good next year as well. They got Peavy back, they got Sale back. They may get, they have Floyd back, Danks if he's healthy. They're young guys, got a lot of experience. So I think that the Detroit and Chicago are going to be two pretty good clubs. And I think that, objectively speaking, the chances of the Indians win the division this coming year are probably not very good. So I think you make the trade with Chu to get a guy you're going to control for multiple years. Maybe it's a Hellickson type. I think that trade actually makes some sense. And I think that, but I think that Hellickson is more the type of guy the Indians want to get, because Shields you only have for 2 more years. Hellickson you have for longer than that. You have to, I think, keep an eye on the long term and really look at the big picture of where's our window. And I think the Indians probably feel like their window is maybe not next year, 2013. Maybe it's more like 14-15 to really get a real chance at beating the Tigers and beating the White Sox in the AL Central.
I am not. You were referring to pitching, and I'm not saying that's all the Indians need to do to possibly become a contender with Detroit and Chicago next year, John. I say the Indians in left field should go after either Victorino or give Melky Cabrera a shot, which I think had come on the cheap because of his problems a year ago. And let's face it, in Kansas City, he was tested that year and put up and was clean, and we know what the kind of numbers he put up that year after escaping from New York, the way I like to put it. And we hear Bay. The Indians are interested in Bay, who can play either left or right. And I say the Indians should go after Euclid. All of these are connections with Francona, of course. What do you hear on any of those possibilities?
Well, I think in the case of Euclid, I have heard the Indians have interest. I heard that from a source this week and reported that. So he's definitely on the radar. I think that certainly I could see Bay being a good bounce back guy, and I do think that again the Francona connection, as you noted, is there. And with Cabrera, I like that idea as well, because I think that the Indians can kind of market themselves as, look, we have some opportunity for playing time, especially if they trade Chu. Basically, the only guy they know they have in the outfield is Brantley. The rest of it's going to be wide open. So you, I think, as Chris Antonetti, you can sell opportunity. You can sell, hey, if you had a little bit of a rough year last year, your numbers aren't quite where you want them to be, come to Cleveland, play in a hitter's ballpark, put up your numbers, and then you can go get paid next offseason. And I think that's kind of how you have to spin it. Or maybe even you say, hey, if you're having a great year, we'll flip you at the deadline to a contender. I think the Indians have to kind of look at that objectively and say, what we can offer is opportunity. And I think that you can offer opportunity at first base. You could offer it at third base. You could offer it at left field, right field if you trade Chu. I mean, there's so many different things they can do. The one thing they do have is flexibility. I mean, because realistically speaking, Bruce, 2-3 years down the road, whenever Cabrera's contract is up, how many guys on the team right now can you say are really, really strong candidates to be on the club everyday roster 3 years from now? You'd say probably Kipnis and probably Brantley, maybe that, and maybe Santana, but that's probably it. So you have a lot of different guys you can move around, and I think the Indians should probably embrace that, because it's a tough decision to make right now, but I just think, objectively speaking, the Tigers keep spending, the gap keeps growing from the standpoint of the payroll, and I just think it's going to be tough. At a time when you wonder if the Royals, Bruce, might finally be ready to make a bit of a surge. They made the trade for Santana. They have some more pieces to trade, so keep an eye on Kansas City as well.
If Johnson, I say if, John, if he is healthy for now that this trade has been made, I love his curveball, let alone that heat. If he's healthy, I think Toronto with Romero, and we know what Burley's capable. He's a steady veterans pro, and he knows how to pitch, and Morrow. They now can challenge Tampa Bay, or at least be categorized, in my opinion, as the second best starting rotation in that division, because who do the Yankees have following Sabathia? And the Red Sox, if they can keep Lester and Buckholz healthy, okay, but Lackey's been a bust. Beckett's gone. I mean, this changes the scenario in that Eastern Division. So what are the Yankees going to do, and Boston?
That's a great question, Bruce. And earlier today I said the same thing. I think right now, as the rosters presently stand, you would say Toronto has the second best rotation in the American League East. The Yankees, I tell you what, Bruce, if the Yankees don't re-sign Hiroki Kuroda, they are in trouble. And we'll see if that holds true, but I really believe if the Yankees don't bring him back, they got problems. So I think because he is that swing guy, he has such an important role on that staff, and he really was their ace this year. CC was very good, but he was hurt a couple times. Kuroda was their Mr. Consistency. So if they don't bring him back, they got problems because they're going to have to try to keep this under this payroll of 189 for next year. Only 189, Bruce, is going to be their payroll starting in 2014, they say. So they have to work around some of those parameters. And the next crew of guys there, Betances, Banuelos, has not really matured the way they want to. So the Yankees have concerns, and the Red Sox, to your point, have concerns. I think Anibal Sanchez is on the Red Sox list of possibilities. They're probably not going to be involved in the Greinke market. And to your point, they're going to have to count on John Lackey bouncing back after surgery. So, I mean, all these teams basically have significant questions in the rotation. Even the Jays do to a degree because of Johnson's health and Romero's inconsistency this past year. Morrow's been injury-prone. So there are some concerns there for Toronto as well. But I do agree that it seems like the Red Sox and Yankees have even more concerns than the Toronto Blue Jays do, and that's, again, why I think that the Blue Jays have a legitimate chance. And let's not forget about Baltimore either, Bruce, because this team made it to the playoffs with a rotation that kind of evolved as the year went along. Wei-Yin Chen was terrific. Miguel Gonzalez became a reliable guy as the year went along. Chris Tillman, Jason Hamill. I mean, they have a pretty good rotation. So let's not overlook the Orioles because they were able to make it to the playoffs this year with a rotation that pitched better than expected and a bullpen that was maybe one of the best in baseball.
Yeah, I guess I'm remiss in not including them, but it just my 2 cents worth. I'll believe it when I see it. Are they a one-year wonder? That's a brutal division. Let me ask you about Greinke. I have said all along, John, the Angels did not make this move to bring in Greinke along with Weaver, especially with this new multi-billion-dollar deal over the next 20 years that they have with their cable system, with a comparable here of STO, not on the same magnitude money-wise, obviously. But they did not make this deal to bring in Greinke to let him slide away in free agency. If they can keep Greinke, they've got Weaver and him as a 1-2 punch that's comparable to any team in the major leagues. Do you see the Angels letting him flee to some other team?
Well, I think, Bruce, they're going to do everything they can to keep him, and I think that to your point, when you part with those types of prospects, and Gene Segura did a very good job at shortstop there for the Brewers after the trade. I think they made that deal with the notion they were going to retain him, and obviously now Dan Herron's a free agent. Irvin Santana's been traded. So the Angels' rotation, all of a sudden, they need one guy at least, and maybe even two. I mean, they're pretty thin after Weaver and C.J. Wilson. So I think they certainly want Zach Greinke back. And I don't know if I'm going to go as far as to say they need him back, but they need somebody of that caliber because the rotation all of a sudden is very thin. So I think they're going to do everything they can to keep him. Some suggestion that Greinke would like to pitch in the National League, maybe wants to play for the Dodgers, maybe wants to play for the Braves. I've heard that before, that he lives in Orlando, maybe wants to train there in Orlando and live there during the springtime and the wintertime. So, I mean, these are all possibilities. And Greinke, I don't know that he'll necessarily sign with the highest bidder, but I do expect somebody's going to give him a significant contract because he is a rare guy when you talk about his physical conditioning, his overall arm history, delivery, a lot of things that people want to see him projecting long-term health, he looks very good at. So I think there's going to be a ton of interest in him, and I do think at the end of the day, I think it'll either be the Angels, maybe the Dodgers, maybe the Braves that Zach Greinke ends up going to this offseason.
Two more managerial questions. I'll let you slide, John. Always appreciate the time you give us. I find it fascinating Toronto made this deal, and they don't even have a manager yet.
They don't. And actually, Bruce, I thought, and I wrote this morning, that they should make another effort to try to get Bobby Cox out of retirement. You know, of course, Cox managed the Jays for 4 years in the 80s, a very close friend of Paul Beeston, has not managed in 2 years. And I thought that maybe this star power would kind of maybe lure Bobby out of retirement. Sounds like that's not going to happen. Mark Bowman from MLB.com talked to Bobby Cox. Bobby said he's going to stay retired, so that's the end of that. But my point there in mentioning Cox is that they need somebody who has some serious cachet. You have a big-time clubhouse now, lots of veterans, Burley, Reyes, guys that maybe didn't necessarily want to be with the team to begin with because they thought they were going to be playing in Miami. They need to kind of be, I think, brought up to speed and kind of sold on Toronto as a destination. Another veteran there, of course, in Josh Johnson. They have Jose Bautista around, Edwin Encarnacion. The clubhouse went sour towards the end of the year last year. So this is a team that I think needs to have a very strong presence, bring the group back together and see what happens. There's a lot of talk there, Bruce, about the Alomars. I don't know to what extent they're going to be in the mix. There are some people there in the media circles there in Toronto who think Axe is a possibility. We will see. I mean, Axe does know Jose Reyes from back in the Mets days, and there is a certain, a very high level of respect for the Alomar family there in Toronto with Robbie's role there as an advisor to the club. So
right.
We'll see. A lot of possibilities there.
Finally, our own ball club. Were you as surprised as many of us that Francona came here to Cleveland? He claims it's because of Antonetti and Shapiro, his relationship. He says he's not the general manager. He won't be involved in roster decisions. But why else bring him in here if he doesn't influence the likes of a Youkilis, the likes of a Bay, who both played for him?
Well, I think from that standpoint, saying that he's going to stay out of their way and let them do their jobs. But there's I think, a real attitude that he wants to be there to help kind of reestablish the Indians brand. And I think that's what he's going to try to do. He's going to draw in guys like a Youkilis, like a Bay, people that may not necessarily have considered Cleveland in the past. And I think that personally there were some reasons. He's got a house in Arizona. It's convenient for spring training. And I think he just wanted to manage. And I think he was done with the politics of Boston, done with the politics of a big-time market, wanted to maybe just get back to a real, just a pure managerial experience. And I think that appealed to him in Cleveland. And I think he's got a chance to build a less pressurized atmosphere. And I think working with those guys, Mark Shapiro and Chris Antonetti, was a big-time selling point for him. And look, Terry Francona is an excellent broadcaster. He did a great job for ESPN this year, but he's a manager. He wants to manage. And with these guys, when it gets in their blood, they want to be in the uniform. They want to be back on the field. He's going to have a good staff with him there. And I think, given the right players, I think he's going to really reestablish a lot there in terms of the Indians brand. And I think give him some time, give him a few years, I think the Indians will be back in contention. Jon
Morosi is one of the best baseball writers in the country. You can check out his material on foxsports.com. We'll check up with you down the line, John.
Hey, Bruce, thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it. Enjoy this great Big Ten football season, though, what remains of it, okay?
All right, my man.
Sounds great.
Jon Morosi. We'll be right back.